Welcome, Bethany. We have two people online and it's recording finally. You don't need to have Okay.
There we go. Okay, so thank you for joining. So it's been about 1 year. I noticed it was July 2nd, I think, that we did this last year. So a lot of the information is the same. So I did keep some of it. I added some new stuff that I thought might be good for you guys to think about and for yourselves and also for the people you call or just anyone that you might know. So we're going to be talking about things related to deaf and hard of hearing people and also assistive technology. I have not used the PowerPoint in a very long time, and I'm forgetting how to advance to the next one. This one? That one. Whew, okay. I clicked something before and it took a second, so I don't know if yeah, it was. Oh, there we go. Okay. So, just a little background on myself. I'm a nationally certified American Sign Language interpreter, and I got my bachelor's degree at Northeastern. They have a program. There's not too many programs around. There's one in New Hampshire. There's one at Gallaudet University, which is the college for deaf people in DC. There's some associate programs. You do have to have a bachelor's in order to get certified. It doesn't have to be a bachelor's in sign language interpretation. It can be anything. But there's not too many programs. There's not too many interpreters. Chances are, if you know an interpreter other than me, I probably know them too. We all know each other. And then just a fun fact, I learned sign language in Mattapoisett when I was 10 in the 5th grade at Old Camden Town. There was a deaf student in my class and we had a sign language interpreter in class. And it was a really great experience. She was a wonderful interpreter. The girl in my class who was deaf, her mom still lives in town. Her whole family signs, grandparents signed, aunts and uncles signed. She was never without the interpreter. She had access and accommodations with everything. And that was the first and only deaf person that I knew until college. And then I quickly learned that her situation in her life is not at all relatable to other deaf people. Most deaf people have parents who don't sign. Most deaf people don't have interpreters in school and don't have the services they need. So that was kind of a big shock to learn that. We're connected on like Facebook, and she lives in Maine now, so like we chat a little bit, but not too much. And then just I guess I missed the good old days when I used to work because I loved what I did. I put a picture of myself. That's me. Yeah, that's one of the World Series games in 2018. And typically we don't talk about our work. We don't say where we're going. We don't say who we interpret for. It's completely confidential. But this was a public event, and they also let me bring my husband along, so he took a picture from where he was sitting. So I normally wouldn't share a picture from work, but there's one. And the Red Sox are very good about providing sign language interpreters anytime there's a special presentation or a Fenway Park tour.
Bethany.
So just some facts that are important to know. Sign language is not universal, and a lot of people are surprised to hear that. A lot of people will then follow up with, well, it should be. So the thing to think about is, would you want to give up your language if Chinese suddenly became a universal language? So, of course, deaf people wouldn't want to. I mean, it shouldn't be universal. And when you think about why it shouldn't be, you can kind of understand. A lot of people ask questions coming from a good place, not realizing that it can be a little off-putting or maybe not the best questions to ask. Culturally deaf people are proud to be deaf and have no interest at all in being able to hear, which surprises a lot of people. A lot of times, people who are born into deaf families, if there's a deaf child whose parents are deaf, that's awesome. Deaf parents want deaf babies, just like hearing parents want hearing babies. People who grow up with the culture and grow up with sign language are very proud. A lot of times what happens is people grow up deaf without sign language and without the culture, and a lot of times those people don't learn sign language until college. A lot of times parents try to keep sign language hidden. They don't want their kids to know about it. They don't want their kids to learn it. It's very. I think that's part of it. I think there's also a lot of misinformation of like if your kid signs, they'll never learn how to talk. Well, a lot of deaf kids who grew up speaking are now adults who never talk because now they have the choice. One time I had a friend who was the disability coordinator at a college, and he had an 18-year-old incoming freshman contact him and say, I'd like to use sign language interpreters. And they were setting up the interpreters for him, and the student's mother contacted him and was like, my son does not use sign language interpreters, like he does not need them, do not provide them for him. And so the coordinator said to me, so we canceled them, and I didn't provide it for him. And I was like, there's so much going on there that he just wasn't aware of in terms of like this young man is finally figuring out his identity. Like he wants to identify as deaf. He wants to learn sign language, and his whole life, like he wasn't allowed to because people told him he couldn't. So a lot of times people will really like become deaf, if you will, when they're older, when they meet other deaf people. And so the word deaf should be capitalized if you're referring to culturally deaf people. So people who are culturally deaf will always capitalize the D. And some people will tell you that they're capital D deaf, meaning like they're proud of it. So like lowercase d deaf is just like simply the ability to not hear. It doesn't incorporate like cultural and linguistic things. Deaf or hard of hearing are the polite and correct terms to use. A lot of people will say hearing impaired, which is not appreciated by deaf people. And I talked to one of my friends who is visually impaired, and I asked him about how he feels about the word, and he said, no, like I'm visually impaired, like that's what we call ourselves. And so I asked him, well, if you could see, if you could have like full sight, would you want it? And he was like, of course I would. And I was like, even though your life would be completely different, like you may not even have the same like family, and he was like, 100% I would. So I think that's like the big difference with deaf people is a lot of times culturally deaf people wouldn't want to hear. There is a language and a culture and a community surrounding deaf people more so than someone who is blind. Also, the term hearing loss can be strange because a lot of times people are born deaf, so they didn't lose anything. Similar to someone who may be born missing a limb versus someone who later in life had an accident and lost a limb. Like there's a difference. There really is no loss. They never had it to begin with. And then lip reading is something that comes up a lot. People will ask deaf people if they're able to read lips. Lip reading is only about 30% accurate. And you can probably tell just watching people's mouths. Sometimes it's hard to tell what people are saying. They talk differently. Maybe they have facial hair. There's a lot of different reasons. Also, if someone turns their head, turns their back to you, or if they're turn taking around the room, it can be hard to follow who's speaking. So lip reading is really not an appropriate solution, I would say. A lot of people will say, "Oh, I know a deaf person, they read lips like this," and I'm sure some people do, especially someone who loses their hearing later in life. But if you've never been able to hear, it's just not accurate. So the term that comes up in our line of volunteering here is probably late deafened. These are the type of people that you'll probably interact with more so than someone who's culturally deaf. And late deafened just refers to someone who's lost their hearing later in life. So this is really different because people who are late deafened don't have the culture, they don't have the community, they don't have the knowledge of knowing other people who are like them. They don't know sign language for the most part. So there can be a lot of isolation, embarrassment, and also lack of resources. And a lot of times, the only people that they're dealing with is medical personnel, which isn't necessarily helpful because you get the diagnosis, but then how do you live your life? So we'll talk more about more of like the community and cultural view. So I think that is true for a lot of situations where doctors are fabulous. I'm not like saying anything bad about them, but they're not living it in the community. So there's a lot of resources out there for deaf people, late deafened people, blind people, especially in.
When did that come around? I've been out of very school.
Yeah, I'm actually not sure. I remember in college, so that was like mid 2000s. So I'm not sure when, how much before then. I forget. Can you remind me? You went to school for like. Okay, nice. And the interpreter that I knew when I was in the 5th grade was Anne McLaughlin.
Oh.
I don't know if I ever told you that. So yeah. But the funny thing is, going back to my previous comment of how we all know each other, I can't find any interpreters who know Anne McLaughlin. And I haven't seen her in probably 20 years, and I would love to see her, but I don't know where she is. I don't think so. Okay, in Boston or?
I've seen her on TV.
Oh, fun. Do you know, say her name again? I don't think I know who that is. I'll have to see how many mutual friends we have on Facebook. Yeah. 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 And even just missing one word, can really change things. Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I actually haven't seen it yet, but I know a lot of people have said great things about it. I definitely. And I heard it's done well because a lot of movies in Hollywood and Netflix, I think, is pretty socially conscious. I think they do a pretty good job in general. But a lot of times when like deaf people or sign language is portrayed in movies, it usually makes deaf people cringe. But I've heard really good things about that movie that it's like very accurate and done very well. So real quick about hearing aids. I don't know much about hearing aids. A lot of deaf people don't know much about hearing aids. But basically, as you all are probably well aware, they amplify sound, but it can be limited. It can still be really hard to hear. It can be hard to be in a setting where there's a lot of people, if there's an echo. One thing that I've noticed, I'm sure you've noticed it as well, a lot of times older people have hearing aids that are very tiny. The advertisement for them is to like keep them hidden, which kind of further supports the stigma, I feel like. A lot of times deaf people will have these giant hearing aids, they don't care, over the ears, like in their ear, very visible. And those seem to work pretty well for some people. The older people I know who have hearing aids, it just doesn't seem like just doesn't seem right. Like something seems a little off. And you see the advertisements for them and the little like that little like newspaper advertisement thing I get in the mail every day. I was recently speaking with someone from the Mass Commission of the Deaf and Hard of Hearing about hearing aids. And the very first thing she said to me was, well, does your family member have a trusted audiologist? And she really like emphasized the word trusted. And she was saying that it's just a lot of times, people are just so desperate to hear, they're so desperate to keep them hidden that they'll spend all this money to try to buy something that's really not the best technology for them. Which is unfortunate. And I think this is probably what people think about most when they think about someone who has lost hearing or a late deafening person, but we're going to talk about other things. So you might remember from last year when we talked about this. One thing I really want to focus on is the picture. So this is a picture of the captioned telephone over there. And I'm actually not sure, maybe you know, is there a person that's typing it or is it voice recognition? Yeah. Okay. Because sometimes when I call my grandmother and I'm like, hi, Meme, Bethany, she's like, Anthony? Who's Anthony? I'm like, Bethany. Like I try to say it clear, which makes me think it's like a artificial intelligence, like listening to my voice. But then sometimes the conversation seems to flow better, which makes me think it's a human who's doing the typing.
We've had one for a couple of years now, and the quality was better before the pandemic. And sometimes we would get a message that said, we're waiting for a person to do it. So I know before the pandemic, it was people. But I almost wanted to say, switch to more computers.
Yeah.
The quality hasn't been very good.
Yeah. And the problem too, like YouTube, the captioning on YouTube is just voice recognition. So the problem with that is like you really need a human who's like following the conversation and understands, because a lot of times words come up that just aren't even close. So closed captioning, we all know about closed captioning. And it's just a reminder that it benefits everyone. So anyone who has young children at home really should have the captions on. It improves literacy, it improves spelling. We have the captions on at home, and it's amazing how much I read them and how many times I miss something and then wait to see what the captions say. I don't think I realized how much I missed until we put the captions on. Flashing fire alarms is the law. Anytime, I always look because I'm strange. There's one over there. Every room must have, I believe in a public building, I think every room has to have a fire alarm. I've had a lot of friends who fight with landlords. The landlords will provide them, so they don't have to. It's the law, they have to. There's lights that can flash when someone rings your doorbell or when your telephone rings. There's vibrating alarm clocks that can go under your pillow or your mattress. So CART, I call it communication access real time, but I think there's another word for it too. But I can't think of what it is. So CART is basically live captions. If there was a town meeting in Mattapoisa that you wanted to attend, you could request a CART provider, and the town would have to provide you with it. So there would be a screen set up, and then the words would be displayed as they're spoken. So I recently called the Massachusetts Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, and ask them about the card because I have a family member who I think would really benefit from it. So I asked them, like, how can I get this family member set up with cards? Do they have to make a profile through the Mass Commission? And she said, all you have to do is tell someone you want cards, which surprised me. I didn't realize it was that simple. So if you have a doctor's appointment and you're having trouble following, you can't hear, it's not working, you can tell your doctor that you want to request a card. I call it communication access real time, but I think it's also called like caption something real time. So it would probably be remote cart. So they would have a laptop set up for you. So if it's the first time they've ever requested cart, there's really actually nothing you have to do. You just show up for the appointment. So the Massachusetts Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing will take care of everything. Basically, all you have to do is tell your provider or tell whoever is requesting it to contact the Mass Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. They'll take all the information. They'll walk the office. Usually it's the office manager who will help with that. They'll help them set everything up and have everything hopefully be ready. So basically it would be most likely a laptop setup. And then when your doctor is speaking with you, there'll be someone remote typing up what they say. It's kind of, I don't know if you've seen it before, if it's live, the person like sits with this little like typewriter thing, their hands are like stacked like this way. I believe it's phonetic based. It's very hard. I've heard the dropout rate for that is like 93%. Like there's very few people. It's really, I don't know. It's national. Yeah, I think it's national. I know that. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So basically, all you have to do is make a request. But a lot of times, what will happen is they'll say, "Oh no, we don't provide that," because they don't know. They do provide it. They have to provide it. So a lot of times, if you can just get the office manager to call the Mass Commission of Deaf and Hard of Hearing, someone there will explain and take care of everything. And it doesn't cost you anything. The doctor's office or the town, whoever provides the service, pays for it. But like I mentioned, I thought you had to have a profile or something set up with the commission. You don't. Anyone can request it at any time. I know, right? Yeah, and I think it's probably the kind of thing that they, doctors, if they heard me say this, would be like, "Come tell people." But I mean, and it's like, they're liable. So if you're not understanding something, they shouldn't be letting you walk out the door without making sure you understand. And I think most likely when you speak back to the doctor, the words will also appear on the computer because whoever is providing you cart remotely, they don't know if you have a family member in the room with you or if there's someone else who has had difficulty hearing. So I think they would probably just type up everything. So the caption telephone we talked about, there's different places that can help you get one. Okay, so that's what I was calling it. But then I've also seen it called something else, but I can't remember. But if that's what you found, then that must be the right one. So I saw something else like caption access, maybe? Caption access real time? I'm not sure. And it's always baffling to me when you're watching like the news or something, and it's like closed captioning provided by. It's like you provide the closed captions. You know what I mean? Like there's always like a sponsor. Like, oh, thank you to the sponsor. It's like, no, but like you're required to provide it. I don't know. I feel like it just like gives the wrong impression. But anyways, so caption telephones. A lot of people don't know about those. But they're pretty great. And the people who are doing CART, people who are providing interpretation, like we all have a code of professional conduct. Everything's confidential. No one cares. Like when I'm interpreting phone calls, like I don't care who did what. I don't care. You know, you're calling this person because you want to buy some weed from them. Like I don't care. No, we don't care. You know, it's not like sometimes people will be like, "Do you have the M&M? Like you got the M&M? Like just say it. Like we don't care." But people have like code words for different things. It's like family drama. Like it really doesn't matter. Like we interpret everything. I was up in Boston. There was a call center. I loved my job. Now I'm like, good old days. Yeah, Boston was great. There was just so much work up there, and it was like cool stuff. It was really fun. Like here, I haven't really done much since moving here, really. But I was doing some appointments and different things. It was different. So TTYs are still around because some people are blind or some people don't know sign language. But people who do know sign language use video relay now. So the interpreter is sitting in a call center, and then we can see the deaf person, and then we wear a headset. We can hear the hearing person, and then we just interpret. There's no breaks. Like with TTY, there was always a break, and then you have to say go ahead. So like the other person knew it was their turn to talk. So with the interpreter, it's real time. It's quick. It's pretty cool. So a lot of people aren't familiar with the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, which I think was passed in 1990. So it's been around for quite a while. It protects deaf people and communication access. So a lot of places will just say like, oh, we don't provide that, but it's mostly because they don't know. Or they're just familiar with spoken language interpreters or foreign languages. So a lot of times they don't provide interpreters for that. They'll tell you to bring a family member. A lot of times they'll tell a deaf person to bring a family member to interpret, which is not true. And a lot of times, like we mentioned, families don't sign, so that wouldn't work so well. Oh boy. I feel like it's amazing how much I've lost in like computer skills over the last 2 years of just not doing anything on a computer. Okay, so real quick, tips for communication. Avoid phrases like I'll tell you later or it's not important. That's hurtful. And basically says you're not worthy of sharing a laugh with us at the dinner table right now. So those are really triggering words for a lot of deaf people. It's just not polite. So just keep that in mind. Fill people in, make them feel part of the conversation. Speak clearly and choose words that are easy to hear. So sometimes when you're speaking with a child, you might change your language and pick an easier word. I feel like that's not always a bad idea. If there's an easier word that can be said and make it easier for someone to hear, think about that. Try to avoid background noises. We just had some. A lot of times you can't control them. Avoid covering your mouth when speaking, your mask. Be patient, and this is for like if you meet someone on the street. Be patient, don't panic. And also, this just made me think of it, don't say sorry. So a lot of times what happens is a hearing person will go up to a deaf person. So being deaf is an invisible disability. And they might say like, is this train going to Boston? And the deaf person will be like, I'm deaf or whatever. And the hearing person goes, sorry, and like moves away and go find someone else. Well, the deaf person can tell you the answer. Just don't panic. Just be patient. Like give them a second to respond. But a lot of times that happens and they're like, oh, sorry. And then the hearing person will go find someone else. Be prepared to write, type, or text. So I've even seen people like use the palm of their hand and like, outline letters if they're stuck. Control the flow of conversation. Make sure one person speaks at a time. No overlapping. Don't be afraid to ask someone what works best for them. and really just think of ways to be inclusive. And also, don't be afraid to tell people what you need. So one example I thought of is appointment reminders. A lot of times when you get an appointment reminder from the doctor's office, it comes through as a recording, and it can be kind of hard to hear depending on what, some people can hear deeper voices, higher voices. So you might get a phone call and not be able to hear it, and you can't say, excuse me, can you repeat that? Like, you missed the date and time, you're not sure. You can ask your provider to have someone call you. You can have that put in your file. This doesn't work for me. I have difficulty hearing. I really need a human to call me to remind me of my appointment. So just little things like that. If you can think of something that's helpful to you, don't be afraid to tell people. A lot of times people want to be inclusive, they just don't know how. Okay, so this is just a question. Why is everything based on sound? So there's something called autism, which is prejudice and discrimination towards people who are deaf and hard of hearing. A lot of times this could be completely a mistake, just not something people are thinking of. And then there's something called autist, which is a person who believes the ability to hear is superior to being deaf. So this kind of segues into all these things that we have in place in our society are based solely on hearing, which they don't always have to be. So for example, like a waiting room, the nurse will come out, or someone will come out and call your name. That doesn't work if you can't hear your name being called. So having someone come up to you, knowing where you're sitting, saying, okay, it's your turn, come on. Doorbells, telephones, announcements on the train. In Boston, sometimes the trains will run express and they just make the announcement. They don't, and then like a deaf person sees all these people getting off the train and they're like, should I get off? Should I stay? Like, what's happening? They do have signs, they don't always work. So deaf people were able, I think they still are, to get like the disability pass on the MBTA, which just lowers the fare for them. And some deaf people don't like that. They don't think there's a reason for that. They think they're just like everyone else. But I think it's the MBTA kind of acknowledging that we're not fully accessible for you, and this is how we're trying to make up for it. Fire alarms, amusement parks. I mean, really everywhere you go. Deaf people pay the same amount to go in, but it's not accessible. And just thinking of all the things you hear, like at an amusement park, like waiting in line, they have the music that's like the theme for the ride. It gets you in this mood, or there's like part of the story of the ride in the waiting room as you're waiting to go in, and just like a performance that's happening over here. I mean, there's so many things that just aren't accessible. And there's so many things that are based on sound and design. When you think about it, there's really a lot of stuff. But there's also a lot of accessibility out there, and a lot of things that I don't really know how common this is in this area, but in Boston, the arts and theater. Wait, sure.
One, the experience not following hearing. And one of the issues I found is that he wasn't getting the feel like that often. You were saying, you hear it. And he said, oh, really, but it doesn't make any sense to have. Well, why don't you go your doctor? Using that during the time. The vision, you wouldn't let anybody touch his ears except just one doctor. So that only can outline.
Yeah. Yep.
I just had my ears checked with a practitioner, and my doctor told me you need hearing aids. And I said, excuse me, and she said you don't hear high frequency noises as well as you should. I was at a 94% now. Yeah, I
don't know. I mean, do you feel like you have trouble hearing?
Not hearing high frequency sound.
Right. And she said, should I hear you? And I said, what do you mean? She said, you don't hear high frequency.
Yeah.
Well enough.
What did she say about 9?
That was my score, like what they were saying.
You're very constant. I have to.
Okay, I'm not hearing the top six, okay.
Yeah, that doesn't seem like,
That
I'm not weird.
sounds like F, F, B, T, H, over the high frequency sound.
Okay.
So, but it would depend.
Well, you just.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but in the high frequency, you
Oh,
are
okay.
hammer the B's, and there are certain sounds that occur in high frequencies, like those sounds that are resonant. But you probably begin in a quiet environment, that you probably would have trouble hearing.
Oh, the sound. Yeah.
Those sounds are so weird.
Yeah, well,
It just feels like
I know.
pushing on your ear.
Anyway, and then, where do you learn sign? Like, where's the easy place to go? How long is it? Should I like to do that?
Yeah,
I just do it with the process
Deaf
and
Inc.
How long it is?
Yeah, it's just like learning any other language. Deaf Inc. in New Bedford has sign language
What's it
classes.
called?
Deaf Inc.
Yeah.
I have it on the last slide. Yeah, like Deaf Incorporated. Yep.
Okay.
They're on, I think they're on William
How
Street.
long is it, you know?
They offer, I believe, 5 levels, and I think it's like each level is maybe like 8 weeks. I'm not really sure.
40 weeks?
Yeah, I mean it's a language,
Yeah.
but I think you'd get it'd be worth it. Well, even just doing one class, but anytime you take a sign class, you always want to make sure it's taught by a deaf person. If there's a hearing instructor, that's a big red flag for lots of different reasons. So I would just make sure it's a deaf
I'm
person.
sorry to jump in.
And deaf Inc. only has deaf people. Thank you.
Thank you, great. Thank you. You all ready?
So let me, okay, so this is really cool. I don't know if you've heard of Wheelock Family Theater. So they have, and a lot of places in Boston do this. So these are the things that they provide people for access so people can go and enjoy the show. So they have special seating for people if you need to sit closer. They have assisted listening, FM you can wear so you can hear like directly from the actor from the microphone. They provide American Sign Language interpreters for usually like 2 or 3 performances per show. Audio description, so if you're not able to see, you can hear what's happening. And they also always, so there's a star, I mean, every show has that. They have Braille playbills and large print playbills. They have drama shops and education classes and workshops. So if there's kids who have difficulty, whatever, they struggle with learning disabilities, they can go explore the set before the show. They can meet the actors, they can learn about the characters. So then when they sit and watch the show, they're able to follow the story better. They have all these really cool things. They have open captioning at every performance. So for them, they have a screen on each side, and it's yeah, I have 2 pictures here, and it's 3 lines with an LED screen. So some theaters will do this, and they only have it for like one night. Some places have it every night. A lot of places in Boston have it regularly. This is the type of thing that I think a lot of theater companies want to do. Theater seems to be very supportive of people who have disabilities or different abilities. There's a lot of theater that involves deaf actors, or that has like deaf storylines. I don't think this is like too far out there. Like if you were to make a request or talk to people about this, if they ever offer it, like I think this is a very, very reasonable accommodation that would help a lot of people, especially if it's advertised and people know that this is the night for the show with the open captioning. So there's a lot of ways and things out there that can help people to, keep their normal life, if you will. I can't remember what the next slide is, but there's also closed captioning sometimes at drive-in movie theaters, at actual movie theaters. Deaf people prefer the captions right on the screen, but unfortunately hearing people come in and don't like that. I had a deaf friend on a flight once, and they shut the captions off because people were complaining about it. Yeah. So there's a lot of you know, people think, oh, I can't hear, I can't go to a concert anymore. A lot of concerts have open captions, or they'll have a screen that has words. There's performers who always have their lyrics up on the screen. There's movie theaters, they have like the rear window captioning. I'm not sure how popular that is, but they used to give you like this, it had the captions on the back wall, and then you'd have kind of almost like a mirror that you like put in your drink cup, and then you'd see like the captions like in front of you. So there's a lot out there. Then there was glasses. I don't know if that's still a thing. You mentioned movie theater and so on. But there was like actual glasses that you would put on, and then you could see the captions on the screen if you had the glasses on. Yeah, so there's a lot of cool stuff. I think a lot of people just don't realize it. And a lot of times things, I don't know if they're advertised too. Like, I was talking to Jackie yesterday about like the movie and pizza night that you guys have. I asked her if it's captioned, and she said it is. But like, I don't know, do people know that it's captioned? Because I feel like some people might be like, oh, I can't go to that, I wouldn't be able to hear. But maybe you could if you knew the captions on. But anyways, I just wanted to share this because it's worth looking into, see what places provide. And sometimes they just don't provide it because no one's asked for it before and they don't know about it. But there's a lot of people who are willing to do things like this, and I think the theater industry is definitely one of those industries that wants to be accessible. Oh boy, did I just go past one or no? Okay, so talking quickly, I mentioned before about like the medical view versus the community view. So the information and resources that you can get from a place like the Mass Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing or Deaf Inc. in New Bedford is very different from the kind of information that you would get from your medical provider. These are the people who are deaf, who are hard of hearing, who are like deafened, who live very full lives, who are integrated in society, just as hearing people are. They know the technology, they can make suggestions, they know how to set up a classroom. If you're, you know, if you have a grandchild or niece and nephew who's really struggling, schools don't know how to set up a classroom for a deaf person. Schools don't know where to find qualified sign language interpreters. It's just impossible to know everything about every different disability, especially if you haven't had anyone in your school in the last 20 years who is deaf. So these are places that can help. Also, I think a lot about the Mass Commission for the Blind. I had a family member who was falling a lot in a nursing home, and they were saying that, or no, assisted living, she kept falling, and they were saying that she's going to have to go to a nursing home. So I asked them if had they ever done like a mobility training with the individual, and we were no. So Mass Commission for the Blind went out and looked at the space, and they made suggestions like you should have tape around this thing. Keep your chair. Don't put the chair you regularly sit in on this side of the room. Put it on this side of the room, closer to the bathroom, closer to the kitchen. They really like rearrange things, and like the nursing home just wouldn't. How would they have known that? You know, like there's just no way that they would have known. So just having someone from the community who's specifically trained or who lives that life go and really just makes a huge difference. So Mass Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing is a state agency, and it's for you. It's for anyone, so you can call them at any time and ask a question. They'll help you. They have case managers if you have someone who needs help with equipment or is having difficulty with something. They're also an interpreter and cart referral agency, so if you need either an interpreter or a cart provider, they can help you with that. If you're having trouble getting an interpreter, sometimes someone wants an interpreter for a doctor's appointment, or if you want cart and the doctor says no, they can help you. They're very helpful. There's really, I can't really think of too many things that you could call and ask and they wouldn't be able to help you. But they're there and anyone can call them, questions or anything. And then definitely can help people get assistive listening technology. There's a few of them throughout the state, but this one right in New Bedford, they do have ASL classes, and same thing, they do case management, and they have the cultural perspective. It's not the medical perspective of like, you broke, you need fixing, put these hearing aids on and have it installed. Like they'll really like follow up with you and make sure that you're doing the best you can and have options. So that's all I have for you. Do you have any questions? Do you guys have any questions? Pat or Blake?
Nope, all
Bethany,
set.
I want to say it was a very good presentation, but we have a couple of suggestions. Can you hear me?
Not really.
Okay, so I'll make the suggestions next time we talk.
You're not supposed to say that, please.
Yeah, I know, I know.
Well, I can see where it says to go louder, but I'm not.
Oh, it's
I'm like
okay.
not a. I'm a.
It's
Mac
okay.
user.
Next week when we talk, we'll talk about
Can you
this.
call Liz's phone? She said.
Pardon? It's not working. Bye.
It's not
Bye.
working. Sorry.
Really good to know that, that's incorporated, not in the classroom.